All right, how is everyone doing today? And welcome to my channel. This educational channel. We try to check out great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, earth-shattering discoveries, and masterpieces from obscure sources. And This is our 209th video that we've done on what we call the reciprocal church, which is where we try to check out um, different spiritual resources that we can compile in our own quivers to use for our own practices, spiritual practices, in a syncretic manner. And we're doing this mainly because we are anticipating the impending doom of all of our Western religions as a result of the fraudulent nature of our scriptures, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. And we've been looking at some of the fraud involved with the uh, New Testament and the Quran in particular, from the works of Abelard Rushlin, Reuchlin, his true authorship of the New Testament, and also his addendum to that. We were going over like the 10 common characters between the New Testament and the Quran. We didn't get to the last one, who was the Archangel Michael. So I think all of them were Jesus and Mary and John the Baptist and Zechariah, his father, John's father, and the Archangel Gabriel, Satan, and Job and Jonah, um, or maybe just their references, because those are Old Testament characters. Um, and Then Archangel Michael. I think there might be one more, but I'll review that and get back to you. So today we're looking at um, a later work by Rushlin, um, which goes into some more of the New Testament. So the New Testament is basically a psyop or psychological operation written by the Romans, who were basically at war with the Jews for this whole period, the first century BC, the first century AD, and under Emperor Tiberius, the Romans put together the committee to create a new Roman religion. And one of the objects of this was to um, create a new Jewish, a new religion, replace Judaism with this new religion that featured a Prince of Peace who believed in rendering unto Caesar what was Caesar's, who believed in turning the other cheek and walking an extra mile with the Roman soldier's backpack, and also to teach the Roman soldier that he should be satisfied with his low pay, and even to be happy with slavery, and so on and so forth. And so A few of the people that were involved in this committee were the Piso family, Gaius and Lucius, and also Seneca the Younger, the famous philosopher. And I guess they kind of put together what they call Ur Marcus, first book of the book of Mark, but this was like the proto Mark. So it's really what we call Q now, which was used as kind of like the source material for the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And um, they put this together and proposed it to Emperor Nero. When he came in, Nero was in there from 54 to 68 AD. And Nero, um, who is portrayed as being this incredibly vile tyrant, I think he might have actually been a good guy. He was married to a Jew, and he just didn't go for it. He said no, and as a result, the Pisos and Seneca um, tried to have Nero assassinated, and they got caught. And in instead, Nero executed two of them, Seneca, who was his former tutor, and also Gaius Piso. Lucius lived, and his son Arius Piso, Arius Calpurnius Piso, took over the uh, the writing. I think Lucius died shortly thereafter, and Arius took over and also it became the family business. His children also wrote many of the epistle or the New Testament. Um, I think the epistles were mainly written by Pliny the Younger, who was uh, Arius Piso's foster brother. So it was all in the family, and Arius Piso was kind of like um, the emperor whisperer. He was kind of like the co-emperor for Vespasian and Titus, who were the Flavian emperors who ruled shortly after Nero. There was when Nero was assassinated in 68. There was a period of about a year where there were three separate emperors who all got put in and eventually were all deposed or assassinated. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, and then Vespasian came in, who was the general for the war that they were fighting against the Jews. And so they were all about putting together this um, new Roman religion. So when they tell you that the Romans were persecuting Christians, that isn't what happened. They were persecuting Jews. And at the time, there wasn't such a distinction between Jews and Christians because, um, you know, Christianity hadn't really been formed yet. But this document that we're looking at from Abelard Rushland, and keep in mind that Rushland is a Jew or was a Jew. And so he kind of, even though he exposes Christianity, the New Testament, and he exposes the Quran, he doesn't bother to expose the Old Testament. So he believes that the Old Testament is legit, but these other ones are frauds. Um, but if you go back to the Old Testament, its issues are quite different than what happened with the Pisos. Although the Pisos, I mean, the Romans had so much power, the Caesars have had so much power that they had control of pretty much everything that was written. And so if it was written, that means that the Romans sanctioned it. Okay, that if you know about it, it means that it got through the Roman censorship. So the New Testament, don't make it seem like it was written by some illiterate fishermen or something like that were part of the group following Jesus. It was written by the rich and powerful forces that had the ability to get this through the Roman censors. Same with the epistles of Paul, where he's talking about sending his letters to the churches of these various places in Turkey or Asia Minor and Greece and Rome. Uh, what is he just gonna put it in the mailbox and have it delivered by mail truck? That there's no mail, sir. The only mail that's being delivered is being delivered by the Roman, powerful. You have to be, you would have to be extremely powerful to be able to send and deliver letters. So anyway, this was all written by the Romans, the Pisos in particular. Now, Arius Piso also went by a number of different aliases, one of which was Josephus. So Josephus was allegedly, according to his fake or fraudulent autobiography, he was one of the Jewish generals in the war and um, was captured by Vespasian, who was at the time the general, and he eventually saw the light and he realized that God now supports the Romans and not the Jews. So he defected to the Jews. He predicted that Vespasian would become the new emperor. When he did become the new emperor, Vespasian pardoned him from his POW imprisonment and took him to Rome to be the new court historian and adopted him as part of his family. And Josephus was said to have lived at Rome for the last 30 years of his life, where he wrote The Wars of the Jews, and he also wrote The Antiquities of the Jews and his autobiography. And then also he wrote all of the Gospels. And if you read the Gospels in unison with the um, Wars of the Jews, you'll recognize that they were written by the same person and that they have countless parallels between them. And one is parodying the other. They both are dependent upon each other. And, people recognize that at the time. A lot of the different sects of Christianity had Josephus in their canon as part of their Bible. And even the preterists still do use Josephus as part of their Bible. But most people got rid of it because they realized that all the things that Jesus would prophesy uh, in the Gospels were fulfilled by Emperor Titus, or the general Titus, Vespasian's son, in the Wars of the Jews. And so when Jesus is predicting his second coming, Jesus' second coming was Titus Caesar. So, looking through the table of contents here, this is basically like the further writings of the Pisos. So, in his earlier booklet, he just really talks about um, more of the Gospels, but here he gets into the epistles and the other writings, and also the wisdom literature, the um, church fathers such as Saint Ignatius and Origen, um, and then some also classical scholars like Plutarch and even Aristotle. These are all written by Arius Piso. He says that Aristotle actually really did exist, but he was kind of like a minor naturalist, and Piso enlarged his oeuvre and wrote most of his major works and then backdated them in the same way that he backdated the Gospels. And then he would also write them into history. So he would backdate. That's why he tampered with the Old Testament, is that he would backdate, and so he would write into the book of Job, for example, a prophecy about the coming of Jesus. And so then when Jesus does come along, it's like, oh, this was prophesied earlier by Job. Well, no, it wasn't. It was just inserted by Piso in one sentence, that he put into the Old Testament, because he had control of the people that were. He commissioned this idea of the Septuagint, which was to turn the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Um, which was also backdated. But he also wrote the Apocrypha, including Esdras, Judith, first, second, third, and fourth Maccabees, um, and so on. So this first chapter is called Piso's Completion of the New Testament. By about 110, the basic parts of the New Testament had been completed. All four Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, and almost all the epistles attributed to Paul. Of the New Testament epistles, only Hebrews remained to be written by Arian in the late 130s, as well as Revelation. So we're going like for like a 70-year period here. Marcus was written probably really 80 years. Marcus was probably written about 60 AD. And then Mark itself was written maybe 70 AD when Vespasian came to power as the Caesar. And then Matthew about 5 years later, Luke about 5 more years. And I can believe that it would take them that long to put it together because there's layer upon layer upon layer of meaning in these things. These are, I mean, give the devil his due, except that he created the devil too. So give the evil his due. He was a very evil genius. These uh, these works have so many different levels of meaning, and most of it is very cruel and crude. Really, a lot of really disgusting stuff is sexually disgusting stuff is also embedded into these gospels. And uh, Roman Piso, another author, has who is a direct descendant of these people. He has a very long uh, article on all of the sick and dirty jokes that are in the New Testament. There are probably like 150 of them. You have to just you have to know the code. Um, uh, where different words have double meanings. We may go over that at some point if I can stomach it. Okay. Um, Piso, with Arian's help, had been writing the Apocrypha, as well as doing other writings he felt helpful for his family. Ben Sirach, his writings as Plutarch and as Nicomachus, who was supposed to have been an ancient mathematician, and numerous additional prophetic works and sections to be voluntarily translated, voluntarily in quotes, voluntarily translated into Hebrew by B'nai Barak. Not exactly sure who that is. Um, and then added to their Hebrew prophets, as we will see. However, he also wished to fill in a few missing pieces for the New Testament. He would have Arian's help. To that end, some short letters were composed and included in the New Testament. Always a loving father, Piso named them after his sons' aliases, John, James, Peter, and even Jude, which was another form of John. There were slight errors in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and so Piso would use apocryphal works that he would write to correct these errors in First Esdras and Jubilees. So he wrote I don't believe he wrote Jubilees. I believe he just edited Jubilees. And I think also I don't know about Esdras, but I believe that Jubilees was written earlier, but he came in and edited just a few sentences to inject his corrections into it. Nor would a discussion of the family's writings of the New Testament be complete without an explanation of the humor and mockery in their own amazing coded attacks on their own works. These coded attacks are among the most startling aspects of the whole saga. Okay, so now we're talking about the letter of James. Piso, while composing works for the Apocrypha, perceived that another letter needed writing for the New Testament. To that end, after finishing Ben Sirach, he turned to the writing of the letter of James, perhaps with Justus's help, his son. By writing James, he accomplished the following purposes. He entitled it after James, the name of his son Fabius Justus in the Synoptic Gospels. So what Piso would do is he'd write these as plays, basically plays. He would write himself into the script as Jesus or as Joseph, and he would write his sons into the plays as um, the apostles and other characters. And then they would perform these in front of the illiterate masses of either Jews or eventually um, Gentiles as well. Once Paul was written, Paul was an attempt to move it into the Gentiles, or I mean the epistles of Paul. So that happened about 100 AD when Pliny the Younger started to write Paul's epistles. That was for originally these were targeted strictly at Jews, but then they decided to enlarge the scope and try to also rope in like uh, the poor masses of Gentiles, especially the slaves and the soldiers. Perhaps this indicated Justus was helping him write it. In any event, it indicated that James was still among the disciples. For when James wrote the Gospel of John about the year 105, he had played the lead, Jesus, and therefore he did not insert his name as James in that Gospel. Rather, he seemed to simply vanish from the disciples. Now he has returned because he has seemingly written a letter for the later New Testament. Piso had written the book of Job, of which he was very proud. Uh, written the book of Job. I thought again that he just edited that book. Um, I thought he just put in like a quote of that book of Job to prophesy Jesus, the existence of Jesus in the future. I didn't, and I don't know that I believe that he wrote the whole book of Job, but that's what he's saying. So Piso had written the book of Job, of which he was very proud. He wished to historicize it by various means, and his efforts are like a trail of breadcrumbs, a progression of one to the next. First, he had historicized Job by doing an insertion of this name into the Greek translation of Ezekiel chapter 14, so that it referred to Job. Then he had written Ben Sirach, and in it, uh, chapter 49, verses 8 and 9, he had said, the righteousness of Job was mentioned in Ezekiel. Thus, so far he had historicized his recent Job, first in the prophets portion of the Old Testament, and then in his Ben Sirach for the Greek Apocrypha. This left only the New Testament in which he felt he needed to historicize it. So now, while writing James for inclusion into the New Testament, he inserted in James chapter 5, verse 11, praise of the endurance of Job. And thus he had historicized his recent book of Job in all three types of religious works. Well, I don't know. I'll have to go back and take a look at the book of Job. You would think that it would kind of stick out like a sore thumb if if he wrote Job and didn't write the rest of the Old Testament. I mean, you've got to figure that the style has got to be very different. Piso is a Roman, living in the first century. Job was, supposed to have been written by Hebrews hundreds of years earlier. So you would think that you would be able to detect a difference. Certainly, Piso was married to a Herod, um, and the Herods were the puppet kings of Judea, and they were, according to at least these sources, they were also Jews. They were descendants of the Maccabees, and so they fled Rome, or they fled Jerusalem when the war started in 66 AD. So I think they were also there at Rome to help him. So they might have been able to kind of work together in order to shape the book of Job into something that sounds similar to the rest of it. But still, I'm interested in taking a look at that. Okay. Faith has been enshrined into the New Testament, almost to the exclusion of good works. Piso corrects the overemphasis by using the letter of James, writing with the sound of authority. He stresses that faith by itself without works is dead in chapter 2, verse 17 through 20, and to elevate the importance of good works along with faith is the alleged reason that some unknown author wrote the letter of James. Okay, this is on the Epistle of Jude. The Epistle of Jude, or Judas, also seems Piso's creation for a number of reasons. So he's saying Arius Piso's creation as opposed to one of his children. It consists of only one chapter and 25 verses, totaling 26, which is KP by the sequence system. He goes into the numerology, which is utterly unconvincing to me. But as an aside, many centuries later, Inner Circle writer Henry Fielding, in his short book, A Journey from This World to the Next, included book 1 with 25 chapters, which also totaled 26, and then included additionally only chapter 7 in book 19 to again accentuate the 26. But Piso used a bunch of different numbers, so it's not as unlikely as you might think. Now, one of those numbers was 46, though, and apparently the Shakespeareans knew this also, and according to Joseph Atwill's book on Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, which shows that William Shakespeare was actually a woman named Amelia Bassano, who was a Jew and whose entire purpose of writing all of the Shakespearean works was to get back at the Romans for writing the Gospel or writing the New Testament. So she knew the whole deal, and so did many of the other people in her circle, including Christopher Marlowe. And um, this was at the time of the King James Bible was coming out, and so apparently had some um, they had some pull there. Uh, Bassano was a musician in the king's court, um, going all the way back to Henry VIII, even though she was Italian. Um, these Italians had moved. Henry VIII had moved them into the king's court, and so they were there all the way through the Elizabethan age and then through James. And she was, super super highly educated in both English and in Judaic stuff, and among other things, John Hudson details how many different subjects that she had mastered and then put into her works as Shakespeare. And apparently, if you look at the 46th Psalm, the 46th word of the 46th Psalm is shake. And then the 46th to the last word of the 46th Psalm is spear. So they put Shakespeare into the Old Testament like that. I haven't even checked to see if that's true or not, but if you do, let me know. Um, okay, as Piso, that's, you know, the numerology stuff doesn't really move the needle with me very well. I'm a numbers guy too, but it just doesn't statistically doesn't really move me. As Piso had created the various Judases and even a feminine one, Judith, it is logical that yet another one created under the shorter name of Jude would likewise be by him. The author, Jude, claims to be the brother of James, as that letter was written by Piso, probably with Justice's help. So it seems was this. One of the purposes of composition was to name and quote Enoch, verse 14, in order to historicize it. That book was an earlier composition by Piso. Clearly, it is written later than the Pauline epistles, as it tells the believers to remember the words spoken beforehand by the apostles in verse 17. He writes to the believers with authority and must be Piso. Okay, the next section he gets into has to do with Peter, but I think we're going to stop right there. And I I think we're going to continue going through this for the next few days. I think he gets into some interesting territory, especially once he kind of gets through the authorship of these different books. But this is pretty interesting because it pinpoints the actual verses where Piso inserted his editorial powers into like the Old Testament and historicizing things. Um, Now, I would just have to point out that the whole idea with Wuchelin is that he said he was contacted by somebody who was in the inner circle, somebody who like knew about this because the Jews witnessed this happening, and so they carried on that tradition of witness of being a witness of the creation of Christianity, fraudulent creation of Christianity, and talked about it in their Talmud, in coded language, and they passed it on through the years. So that's where he's kind of getting this information, along with reading all of the ancient documents in their original languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, Egyptian. I believe he read all those languages. And so he was able to piece these things together through correspondences, um, and it's a pretty impressive accomplishment, and it was done independently also by Roman Piso. They both came up with the idea that Calpurnius Piso wrote the Gospels um, independently of each other. Then they discovered each other's work and collaborated a little bit before Reuchlin died. Okay, thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.